The BBC published an interesting story about how much income tax is paid by the richest people in the UK. 60 of the wealthiest people in the UK collectively contributed more than £3 billion a year in income tax in the tax year 2021-22. This is an average of £50 million per person. This did make me think, what must it be like to pay £50 million in tax? Wow, that's some amount of money. I think it's understandable that people paying that amount of tax might not want to pay more tax. Now, I believe that we need a massive increase in spending and investment in the UK to restore public services, to restore the national infrastructure, to get people well again so that they can work. This does require the government finding significantly more revenue. This could be done by increasing borrowing for big investment projects that will more than pay back their cost in the long run. Many people think that because debt is at record levels since the post-war period, it has to be reduced and it can't be increased. This just isn't the case. Markets would be fine with an increase in borrowing if it's invested well. I did a video on UK debt recently. I think there's also the possibility to increase taxes, and I often talk about increasing taxes on the rich. Now, I'm in favour of some kind of wealth tax because there's so much wealth in the UK. But the BBC article made me interested to explore further how much tax the rich are actually paying. So how much income tax do the rich pay? This chart shows that the 1% taxpayers with the highest income, they receive 12.5% of total income and they pay 29% of total tax revenue. Whereas the 50% with the lowest income pay only 9.5% of total tax revenue, yet they receive 25% of income. So the UK has a progressive tax system, and you would expect the distribution to look like this. Many of those on the lowest incomes will be paying very low or even zero tax, whilst those on high incomes, of course, will be paying a lot more. Let's look at some more detailed figures from the Office for National Statistics. In 2023-24, there were 35.9 million taxpayers. This shows the breakdown of how much tax is paid by the amount of income earned. At the bottom end, 2.8 million people earning between 12,500 and 15,000 paid an average of £221 per year. 28,000 people are earning more than £1 million annual income. Those earning between 1 and 2 million are paying an average of £550,000 tax. The 9,000 people that earn more than 2 million a year are paying an average tax of around £2 million. This is a lot less than the average 50 million that the top 60 pay, but £2 million is still an eye-watering amount of tax. For the highest paid, the average rate of income tax is around 40%, 41%. Expressed in percentage terms, it doesn't sound so bad. It's those absolute numbers that sound like staggering tax bills. Is it fair that the richest people pay so much tax? The first point to make here relates to the amount of wealth that the richest people in the UK hold. While the richest pay very large sums in taxes, their wealth is often disproportionately higher compared to the rest of the population. For example, the richest 10% of households hold 43% of the wealth in the UK, whereas the poorest 50% of households hold 9% of the country's wealth. Since 2008, growth, productivity, real incomes have all been sluggish and basically flatlining. Wealth, on the other hand, has been dramatically increasing. By 2020, total wealth in the UK was more than £15 trillion. The wealth of the 10% most wealthy alone is £6.6 trillion. The size of the UK economy is around £2.3 trillion, so you can see just how big this wealth is. Some of this wealth is taxed by capital gains tax, but at much lower rates than income tax. So the large amounts of income tax that the richest people pay doesn't seem to be so unfair. This amount of wealth confers a lot of economic power and influence on society. It can also be pointed out that the wealthy benefit from the public goods and services provided by the state, such as infrastructure, legal systems, social stability. This helps create the environment in which they accumulate their wealth. Wealthy people also benefit from being able to employ healthy, educated workers. I think there's a strong argument that higher contributions can be seen as a way to reinvest in society that enabled the success of rich people, ensuring its continued functioning and fairness for all. As I said, it's a fact that the government needs to get more revenue. I think there is scope for increasing income tax on the most wealthy. We don't pay enough tax in the UK. It's interesting looking at how UK tax compares to other countries. This chart shows tax as a percentage of GDP. The blue line shows the UK and the green line the other EU members prior to the Eastern European enlargement. It can be seen that UK tax revenue was at similar levels to our EU neighbours through the 60s, 70s and into the 80s, with Scandinavia generally higher and the US significantly lower. The advent of Thatcherism brought tax cuts in the 1980s, and we see UK tax revenue fall significantly below other EU countries. On average, other EU countries have remained around 1.2 times higher than the UK, and Scandinavia 1.3 times higher. The highlighted data here shows the tax paid by those earning £2 million or more. It's around 9,000 people, and they earn an average of around £5 million, of which they pay an average tax £2 million, and they keep around £3 million. This is just a back of the envelope calculation, but we can see what would happen if we increase the tax paid by 1.2 times to EU levels, or even by 1.3 times, 30% to Scandinavian levels. At Scandinavian levels, the split would be 50-50, tax 2.5 million, keep 2.5 million. Just increasing the tax for these 9,000 people would give an extra £5.4 billion. This would be so useful. Estimates suggest that abolishing the two-child benefit cap would cost around £2.5 to £3.4 billion per year, and maintaining the pensioners' winter fuel allowance would cost around £1.5 billion a year. The cost of both of these would easily be covered by this tax increase on those with £2 million plus incomes. I would personally go for something much more radical. What would happen if we increase the tax paid by those earning £5 million a year by 60%? Increase it from a rate of around 40% to 74%, just for a limited time to catch up with the shortfall since the 1980s. Could we convince the rich to do this to get the country back on its feet? Taking £3.7 million in tax and leaving the person with 1.3 million, we can ask the question, does anyone really need more than £1.3 million annual income? If we did something this radical, this would raise an extra £10.8 billion per year. If we were to radically increase income tax on the rich, even at more reasonable levels than my radical proposal of 74%, I would propose two things that are really important. One, we should emphasise that this is not about penalising the rich, soaking or exploiting the rich. The case needs to be made that for everyone to have a minimum level of education, healthcare, housing, etc., more tax needs to be raised. The rich used to pay a lot more tax prior to the 1980s. I think we need to sell them the idea that they can do so again. There'll always be people who say that they'll leave the country if taxes are increased. I say let them. If you don't care about the UK, leave. But if you stay, let's create a civilised and fair society. Secondly, we need better politicians. I don't blame anyone for not wanting to give our current politicians more money. We need much more competent, service-minded people in charge. And I think we need hypothecation. I would love the government to calculate exactly how much it would cost to build 50 state-of-the-art hospitals, 10 high-speed rail lines covering different parts of the country, new buildings for all schools, 0 waiting lists, etc. Perhaps tax increases for the rich could be for a limited period, say 10 years, and specific commitments made about how the extra money would be spent. Some may call me naive or an optimist. I definitely am. But I think we should shoot higher than we currently are. We need more tax, that's a fact. So let's do something about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.